Hello, and welcome to the University of Utah Press's podcast. I'm Hannah New, and with me today are two wonderful poets, Lindsay Lusby and Kimiko Hahn. Kimiko Hahn chose Lindsay Lusby's manuscript for the Aga Shahid Ali Prize in Poetry, and Lusby's book, Catechesis, came out in the spring of this year. Lindsay Lusby is the author of two previous chapbooks, Blackbird Whitetail Red Hand and
It can be pronounced many ways, Imago or Imago.
Imago.
Yeah.
And the winner of the 2015 Fairy Tale Review Poetry Contest. Lusby is the assistant director of the Rose O'Neill Literary House at Washington College, where she serves as assistant editor for the Literary House Press and managing editor for Cherry Tree. Kimiko Hahn is the author of 9 books of poetry and is the winner of the Penn Folklore Award for Poetry, the American Book Award, and the Shelley Memorial Award from the Poetry Society of America. She's been awarded fellowships from the New York Foundation for the Arts, the Guggenheim Foundation, and the National Endowment for the Arts. From 2016 to 2019, she was the board president of the Poetry Society of America. Hahn teaches in the MFA program at Queens College, the City University of New York. So thank you very much to the both of you for coming here today.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
Thanks. Kimiko, I'd like to talk about what drew you to the manuscript above all others in this contest, or maybe talk about your process of how you picked the manuscript.
Okay, well, I'm probably going to get myself in trouble here. When I first look at manuscripts, I don't actually read them. I flip through and I look at the words on the page as if the words were a fabric, because there's a certain kind of diction that I look for, and that is, it can be very clear, simple diction, or it can be kind of nubby, to use a fabric-related word, but I'm looking for some kind of texture to the language. Once I see that, then I start reading. And that was certainly true with Lindsay's. That was true of all the finalists, and the manuscripts were all absolutely terrific. What finally drew me to choose Lindsay's was her really wonderful economy. And so it was a wonderful diction. The language she chose was just absolutely clear and delicious and beautiful and delicate and sinewy, all those things, and sparkly. And let's see, what other words can I use? Almonds-like, since I have a cup of coffee with almond milk. But also the themes are themes that I find, for myself, captivating. And I also am partial to poetry that uses literary allusion, and in this case, the allusions were also to popular culture, cinema, and pop culture, as much as, say, Grimm's fairy tales and narrative. And I really, really like that in the economy of what she has, the economy itself was blasted open by use of allusions.
I'm glad you brought that up. That leads into a question I wanted to ask about the themes that you use: fairy tales, sci-fi, aliens, William Blake.
Yes.
Let's go all over the map here. And last night in the reading that you gave, you talked about these forbidden topics. And this is kind of a question for both of you. What is forbidden in poetry, and should there be forbidden topics in poetry?
I don't think there's much that's explicitly forbidden. There are just certain topics that are implicitly beneath poetry, depending on who you talk to. In my case, like working up to the idea of, hey, I can write poems about my favorite horror movies. Horror movies are not considered part of high culture, which is where poetry tends to reside in most people's minds. But I think as a matter of decency, there are probably some topics that should be avoided unless you have direct experience and some kind of authority on that topic. Since most of what I have played with in my writing is fictional, I feel like I can do a lot more. There are fewer boundaries for me since I'm playing with fictional sources. But I feel like if you're working with topics around race or gender identity or sexual identity, you do need to be careful that you aren't treading on territory that doesn't really belong to you. So it's just a matter for me of being responsible to your own work and also to your readers, and just thinking deeply about what it is that you're saying and what the implications could be to someone who isn't you.
Interesting.
I like your use of the word responsible. I remember I was having a difficult time myself a number of years ago, and I was chatting with a friend of mine who happens to be the novelist, Walter Mosley, and he so annoyed me because he said to me exactly what I say to my students. I said, well, there are certain things I just feel that I shouldn't be writing about. This had to do with my own daughters, writing about my daughters. And he said, you can write it, doesn't mean you have to publish it, right?
Yes,
so
that's another
write
thing.
it, but then I totally agree with Lindsay. Then as the editor of your own poems, as the keeper of your own poems, do you publish it? Where do you publish? I mean, I think also now there's so much about trigger warnings, and that makes me a bit uncomfortable, both as a poet and as a teacher, because when I think of the word trigger, I don't think of trigger warnings. I think of triggering prompts. Richard Hugo, the poet, has well, he's dead now, so he had, I guess, his famous book of essays, Triggering Town, which is all about writing prompts. So that's a question. For me, that's an ongoing question I don't have answers to yet.
Yeah, I do. I definitely feel like this is an ongoing question. And back when, long time ago, when I was doing my MFA with Rodney Jones, this topic was brought up, and Rodney just sat back and went, I think the word Snickers should never be in a poem. And that was his thoughts on the topic. So, but maybe Snickers should be in a poem. Depends on the writer.
Maybe that's our writing prompt for today.
Yes.
Use Snickers in a poem. That was one of the things that attracted me to your poetry, was the use of these pop culture references. And I hope you continue to do that.
It's definitely my plan.
You were reading some Forensic Files poems last night, which I got really excited about. But you also told a perfume story last night. And so I was hoping you could tell that story and read the poem for us.
Oh, of course. So back a few years ago, when one of my favorite people, my mentor and former boss, Jean Dubrow, was still at the Rose O'Neill Literary House where I work, we put together our very first co-editing project, poetry anthology, and it was born out of her particular obsession with perfume. I had no experience with perfume, and I wasn't even particularly curious about it to begin with, but her obsession, I think, triggered something in me, and throughout the experience of putting together the anthology, I really became engrossed and definitely a new fan of perfume. I did not wear perfume before, and now I wear it almost daily. It's just like a little spot of joy for me, just a little sensory experience that carries me through the day. So we were putting together this poetry anthology called The Book of Scented Things. And it was all based on a prompt that we would send to poets across the country, along with once they said they wanted to do it, we sent them a small sample of perfume that Jean kind of paired with their work. What she knew of them, if she knew them personally, or if she was just familiar with their poems, she tried to pick something that she thought would vibe with that. So they were sent sample sizes of these specially picked perfumes, and then their job was to smell it, spend some time with it, and then use that scent as a jumping off point for a new poem. It could be about absolutely anything. It just had to originate in that experience with the scent. And of course, it's always great to have a prompt, especially if you're stuck in your writing. And I was currently working on this series of poems about the Silence of the Lambs, and I was trying to figure out what the next one was going to be about. I had the title picked out already because it's a line of dialogue from the movie, and I had the most evocative ones that I thought would be good for creating a poem, because I started with the title and then the poem came from there. And so I decided, hey, why don't I think this one would actually be good for perfume. And of course, there is a perfume that is mentioned in Silence of the Lambs. There's the iconic scene where Hannibal Lecter smells Clarice Starling through the glass. And even though she wasn't wearing the perfume that day, either the day before, the day before that, he could still smell on her L'air du Temps by Nina Ricci. And when I looked it up, it wasn't too expensive. So I decided, hey, I am going to buy a bottle and see what comes of this. When I got it, it was definitely not a scent that appealed to me personally. Like, it's not one that I would wear. It was very powdery. That's really like the overriding sensation that I have when I think of that scent. It felt cloying to me in a way, but looking at the different ingredients in the poems, like there are certain standard ingredients that are used in many different combinations of scents. So those were always good words to use, like rose water, sawdust wasn't to do with the scent, but that was another image that I was trying to bring in with mummification and preserving a body. But then clove bud, I guess, was another one. But yeah, these are I'm pulling directly from the poem because I'm having a hard time remembering the other things. Oak moss is another one. Vetiver. Yeah, they're just particular ingredients that are perfumers will frequently return to create new scents. And so I use that perfume as a jumping off point to write this poem. And let me flip open to it. And it's called "How Do We Begin to Covet Clarice?" after L'air du Temps, Nina Ricci. When a look is not enough, you must dig a hole inside her and bury your ruin there. In the hollow of her, offerings of clove bud and oak moss, sawdust and rose water. Smell the florid rot of want, the humid musk of need. Let them choke on each other until they are one blurred retching, a wintering hawk moth pulled whole from your throat.
Great, thank you.
I actually have a question for you, Lindsay.
Okay, please.
Which is, so the title of that poem, the quote is about coveting.
Yes.
So that is a theme that interested you in particular from the film. I mean, that's a line that obviously jumped out and that you decided to use. But what's interesting to me is the poem that's, well, I guess my question is, did you start with that line and then move in with the idea of the perfume, or did you start with the perfume poem and then realize that that line fit with it? Do you know what I mean? Which came first?
The title, the line came first. And when I was mulling over how I wanted to enter that poem, it hit me that perfume is really a lot about desire. So it seemed to be a good fit for that one. And my particular experience with that scent, how cloying and kind of overpowering it felt to me, seemed also to fit with the theme of coveting and desiring something that is not yours, that you cannot have, in a way that kind of chokes you, that
nice.
steals the air from you.
I also wanted to add that Diane Ackerman, the poet and novelist and essayist,
yes.
she has this book you made,
A Natural History of the Senses.
Natural
Yes.
History of the Senses,
I love
which
it.
is wonderful. And
Yes.
and as you know, the chapter on the sense of smell, she writes, and I haven't read this in a long time, so
It's been a while for me too.
okay. But I think basically she says that smell is the most difficult to describe, and we often use words from other senses in order to describe what we're smelling. So a baby's head smells like powder or like shampoo. There's no real word for that particular smell.
Yes.
It often has to do with taste. So that's really interesting to me when we are trying to use that sensory, that sense in a poem. So
Yes.
it's an interesting writing prompt.
Absolutely. And that was definitely the most memorable quote for me from that section of the book as well. And part of when Jean and I were working on the Book of Scented Things, she introduced me to a lot of different perfume reviewers, and in reviews they would just use so much poetic language, and it was always these comparisons to experiences in different senses. So yeah, describing scent is a practice in borrowing, I think, borrowing from the other senses to create some sort of simulacrum, just to throw in some big words there. Another of my favorite things was just the ingredients themselves were just these
Diction.
Yes, these
Sorry, I had to
delicious
chime in.
compound words.
Yes.
I'm in love with compound words, like pre-existing ones, and creating new ones, which I feel like you have to be really careful about because not everything works well smashed together. But yeah, just thinking about the sonics, how it feels in the mouth. Compound words are just kind of like spells to me, just very
That's a good way
magical.
of putting it.
Yeah.
Change of topic. I think we can't not discuss the collage poems
Oh yes.
in this book, and I think this is. I've been at the press for about 6 years, and this is the first poetry book that we've published that's had collage poems in them. Or do you call them collage poems? What do you call them?
So when I was making them and when I was still kind of sending them out, I, just to like literary magazines and things, I was calling them collage poems or poem collages. But when it was more solidified with the book, I started just lumping them in with the general visual poetry category, which I feel like embraces anything visual that a poet makes. So either one, really. But collage is the medium. And I feel like even before I played around with visual elements, I feel like my approach to text, to writing poems has always been a kind of collage of like throwing in all of these different influences and things that inspire me that I feel should be put together to create a new picture.
Kimiko, what were your thoughts when you first saw these collage poems?
I'm very interested in the visual. I'm a daughter of an artist, a visual artist, so I grew up with a lot of art, and in fact collages. So in terms of the way I look at the world and what I'm interested in writing, I mean, I'm interested in collage poems that are all text. That's been around for decades, of course. And then the newer visual poems that have been coming down the pipeline, I think, are fantastic. And my feeling about Lindsay's, my feeling is that that these poems are not there because her sequences were missing something, but that they added a dimension to what she was doing. So that's what drew me to the whole manuscript, and having that as part of the whole.
Yeah, after I called you and and I was flipping through your manuscript, I got a little nervous when I saw them. Because
I don't blame you.
Yeah,
that's a lot for a press to take on.
Yeah, I didn't know how. I knew, which is tended to be false, but I knew we couldn't do color, and I felt like color was
general.
essential.
I mean that sounds normal. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's expensive to
Yeah.
print color. So I totally get that.
Yeah, so I was nervous how they'd come out in black and white, and I remember going back and forth with the production manager about how she has a lot of red words, and red doesn't, it just looks gray. And I was afraid the emphasis would be lost. So kudos to Jessica, who's our production manager, who was able to get the color in at the last minute.
Yes,
So,
thank you, Jessica. It made so much difference. I mean, I would have been happy with grayscale, but I'm ecstatic with the color. So I'm incredibly grateful.
Yeah, that was all due to Jessica. And it just fascinates me, the collage poems. How do you do anything with them at readings? Do you?
So for a few readings where there's a projector available, I've put together a slideshow that's just the collage poems, and so I will read the poem that the collage is paired with, and just have it projected behind while I'm reading.
Oh, okay, great.
And that's been fun, and I think the audience has enjoyed it too, because it's just like another element for them to absorb while they're also listening to the words. So it creates a different kind of experience. But yeah, it's something that I'm playing with, and when there's the option available, I do try to have the slideshow be a part of the reading.
Yeah, that's excellent.
I'm interested. My students don't know this yet, my grad students, but one of my assignments this semester will be extra illustration.
Oh, cool!
So to take a book or a text and to collage, if you will, inside. Yeah. Do you do that yourself? Because I'm just embarking on that for myself.
I haven't yet, but it is something that of course I think about when I'm reading. Like we're all creating these images in our heads when we're reading, and yeah. So that is something that has definitely occurred to me, but not something that I've done. But I think that the fun thing about adding illustrations in a way. And something that I have a friend who is an illustrator, Robbie Bear. She's amazing. And I'm pretty sure it was something that she said one time, like maybe like 10 years ago at this point. But she said when she is working on illustrations, she doesn't try to create a literal translation or, a visual translation of what is on the page. She tries to bring in something new. So it's like a visual interpretation that kind of does its own work and brings in its own set of influences that are a little bit different from the text. So they add to it in a way. And so it's not just like, here's exactly what you just read.
Yes. Yeah. So would you call that juxtaposition, working as a method?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds
I'm still trying to
good.
wrap my head about
Yeah.
teaching this semester.
Yeah.
And what else besides juxtaposition, but yeah.
Well, I'm sure your students will come up with some really cool
Oh,
things.
yes, they will.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
Well, and I hope you'll be following
yes.
your own prompt.
Yes, exactly.
Good.
Well, that's partly why I'm assigning it.
Yes.
That'd be interesting to see your take on it, since you had artists in your family.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to discuss was the title, Catechesis, a Post-Pastoral. And I want to discuss both of those, the
Okay.
subtitle and the title. Why are they together? Why did you pick them? Yeah, things like
Very
that.
good questions. So Catechesis was the name of the manuscript from the very beginning, when I first started writing it, when it was just a few fairy tale poems that I had. I was drawn to the word to start because so catechesis is it's the body of oral stories that are taught to children growing up in the Christian or Catholic Church, and so that to me brought in, of course, folk and fairy tales. So there was that reference that of course I needed to have there, but then it brings in the religion aspect that although I'm not a religious person, that's always in the background for me because I was raised in a religion. So as I mentioned last night, I've come to think of it as sort of an architecture for how I got to know the world, how I see the world now, how I engage with story. And then it also had the sound to it. The esis at the end just makes it sound a little scientific. Like it's not an ology, it's not a study of something, but I feel like it hints at that. And then when the manuscript started to come together a little bit more, and I knew what some of the sections were going to be, it really did become an architecture. So the title and the titles of the sections create a structure for the book that all relates back to the book of Revelation in the Bible, which is probably the most exciting book of the Bible, I think, just because it's so mythological. There's so many different fantastical elements, and a lot of apocalyptic elements, a lot of world ending, world beginning. So I use that as like a scaffolding for the book, and kind of hints to the reader at not necessarily what this means, but how the writer is approaching putting these different things together, and how they create their own sort of narrative throughout the collection as a whole. And so the term post-pastoral is actually something that I've only become more familiar with over like the last few years. So it wasn't with the book from the beginning, but once I read more about the term and what it entailed, I was like, oh, that is what I've been writing. So it felt like a real moment of identity for me, a real epiphany about what kind of writer I was. And so I wanted to include it in the title as another hint to the reader of like the kind of world that they were entering, and that, you know, this isn't a world that is bound by religion in any way, which catechesis might kind of sound like, but it is very much rooted in the natural world, but not necessarily the traditionally beautiful parts of that world. It's interested in monstrosity and deformity and decay, and appreciating what is naturally beautiful about those things. I don't think you have to do anything to make those things beautiful. I think they are already in their own way. So I like to celebrate those things in my writing. So it's the structure, and then it's the setting, basically.
Nice. I was like, do you mind reading one of her poems?
Sure, absolutely.
I have some of my favorites, but if you want to read one of your favorites.
Well, since I haven't prepared, I'll read one of your favorites.
Okay, there's, I wrote down the page numbers.
Okay. What's the story, Mother? Take comfort in this. You are not dear to me. O night of desirable objects, you are the honey trap I cast deep into this bracken of asters and catchflies. You will watch the dark undress, peel back its beard of sepals. Do not call out for me. Let this pale hand cover your mouth. Let it smother you with my love.
Great, thank you.
Did I get all those words okay?
Yes,
Sepals,
absolutely.
okay? Okay.
Yeah, that was beautiful. Thank you.
Oh.
And to end, I would like for you to read a poem.
Oh, okay.
Again, you could pick your favorite. I also have some of my favorites.
Well, I want to see what some of your favorites are.
There you go.
Okay. I can't lie to you about your chances, but you have my sympathies. The truth is, when you die in your dreams, you wake here, sap stuck beneath a juniper, bones turning back to egg white. What kind of mother watches her children consumed and does not consume herself? Your small body held milk warm in the throat and unmade there. Now, make it new again.
Great. Thank you to the both of you for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been so wonderful to, first of all, finally meet you, and to, of course, meet Kimiko. And I always enjoy doing interviews because I like poems. I don't always know what I think when I'm going in. So when the questions are posed, the answers form that I didn't know were there before. So it's always fun to find out new things.
Yes, yes, it is.
And of course to hear what you have to say about these things too.
Yeah, absolutely. It is fun.
Great. This has been Hannah New with Lindsay Lusby and Kimiko Hahn for the University of Utah Press.